Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. The Green Bay woman charged with murdering and dismembering a man will not get another competency evaluation.
The request, one of several motions ruled on today by a Brown County judge in the case involving Taylor Schabusiness. The judge actually ruled on more than a dozen motions, most of them made by the defense. Brittany Schmidt sat in court for all 7 hours of discussion. She joins us live outside the Brown County Courthouse to walk us through those major decisions. Brittany.
Cami, after several hours of listening to witness testimony, the judge did weigh in on several motions. Many of them focused on Schabusiness' statements to police during the interviews after the alleged crime was committed in February of 2022. The defense argued that Schabusiness' statements that she gave to police were involuntary because he says she was under the influence of meth and other illicit drugs. The defense argues the use of drugs impacted her ability to recall and accurately report events. He says she was not in a state of mind where she could knowingly give consent to DNA swabs and waive her Miranda rights. The prosecution argues there's no evidence to suggest she was under the influence of drugs at the time of the police interviews. During witness testimony today, all detectives on the stand said they did not believe she was under the influence of drugs when they were in contact with her. The judge himself reviewed all the videos of the taped interviews. Here's what he witnessed.
I look at her physical demeanor as she's answering the questions. Everybody that testified here described, here's what you generally see when you're seeing somebody on meth. And they describe these characteristics that you would see. And yet when I observe Ms. Schabusiness in these interviews, she seemed very relaxed, answering questions very, very calmly. Her demeanor was one of engagement in talking with the officers.
For those reasons, the judge denied the defense's motion to suppress her statements. He also made the decision to not dismiss the third-degree sexual assault charge against Schabusiness. Today's hearing wrapped up with the judge going through potential evidentiary photos that would be used at trial just to make sure that none of them were too gruesome for a jury to see. He also noted he would like to have 4 alternates sitting there for the trial, which is expected to start in July. Reporting live in Brown County, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.